everyone, welcome to this video. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this mini income and expense tracker. So the way this works is you're going to double click in this cell and you're going to select a month. So I'm going to select any day from the month of March, and this is going to update to the corresponding month and year. And then you're going to come into this income section and you're going to add all of your income sources. So let's add a new one. Let's do other one. And then you're going to assign an expected amount to each of those income sources. So let's do $40. As you can see, I have nothing in my actual amount right here. And that's where this income transactions table comes in. So first you're going to set the day of the month in which this transaction occurred. So let's say it happened on the 12th. And as you can see, this date is going to automatically appear. So you don't have to type the entire date, but you will still know what day of the week this was. And then you can select one of your income sources. So let's do other one. And you can add the amount you received in that transaction. So that could be $10, and that's what you're going to see here. And if I received another $10 in a second transaction, I can just select that from the drop down, and that will be added up here. And then as you can see, the difference between what you expected to receive and what you actually received will be shown here. And then if you scroll to the right, you're going to find the expenses section that works pretty much the same way. So you're going to enter your expense categories here. Then you're going to enter your expected amount, your budget. So that can be maybe $300. And again, you're going to come in here, you're going to set a day, and then you can select one of your categories from the drop down. And these drop downs are created using all of the information that you entered here. And then I assign money to that transaction. So I'm going to show you how to create this from scratch in a new tab. And as usual, I'm going to try to show you as many features and as many formulas as I can. And one very important thing to remember when you're following my tutorials is make sure that you follow along and do everything in the exact same cells that I'm doing it. This way, if you run into any issues, if something is not working as intended, you can come into my file and compare it with yours, and everything will be in the exact same place. So let's get into it. So I'm going to start in this new blank sheet and I'm going to name it April. You can do this with any month that you want, but I suggest you follow along with April as well, just to make sure everything looks exactly the same in the end. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create this section right here. So I'm going to start by selecting the group of cells starting on cell B2 all the way to cell E3. And I'm going to merge them together. And then I'm going to go into data while that group of cells is selected, data validation, and I'm going to click on add rule. And then I'm going to click on this drop down option and I'm going to select as criteria the is valid date option. And then I'm going to do reject, and then I'm going to check this box that will show a help text in case you enter something that is not a valid date. Once I select all of these, I'm going to click on done. And when I double click on this group of cells, this is what I should see. This calendar will pop up. So I'm going to select any day from the month of April, and this is what I'm going to see. And what I'm going for is I want it to look like this. So I'm going to start by giving some formatting to the entire sheet. So I'm going to click here on this little square right here to select the entire thing. And as I always mention in my tutorials, this is something that I like to do to make sure the formatting is nice. So I select this center option. I select this align in the middle. And then I select this wrap option. So that way I make sure that everything that I input from now on will be centered. So then I'm going to select this cell and I'm going to click on format, number, custom date and time. And I'm going to find the one that has just the month and the year. And if you can't find it, you can build it yourself by selecting these options using this arrow. And then you can also delete things. So I'm going to select this month and year option and I'm going to click apply. And then I'm just going to have it be a bigger font. Maybe let's do 20, and then I'm going to bold it. And I'm going to make this a bit taller. And then I'm just going to wrap this in a black border. So now that I have this, I'm going to skip the summary part and I'm going to jump directly into creating this income summary section. So I'm going to start on cell B10 and I'm going to select this group of cells all the way from B10 to E11, and I'm gonna group those. And then I'm gonna write income summary. And then this next row is going to be the totals. So for now, I'm just gonna do total and I'm gonna leave this blank. And then I'm going to write my labels on row 13. So this is going to be income sources, and then I'm gonna have my expected amount right here, I'm gonna have my actual amounts here, and I'm gonna have my difference. So I'm gonna make this column a bit wider just so all of my rows are the exact same size. I'm gonna make this a bit wider, and then I'm gonna start entering some income sources as an example. So let's do paycheck 1, and then let's do paycheck 2, and then let's do side hustle. So let's have those 3 just for our example. And then I'm gonna give these expected amounts. So I'm gonna do 100, 200, and 300. And then this one is going to be filled automatically from my transactions table that we haven't created yet. So this is as far as we're gonna go in here. And then I'm gonna make column F a bit smaller, same with column A, just so I can keep everything in sight. So now I'm gonna move on to creating this income transactions table. So this has 4 columns, so I'm gonna select 4 columns starting on column G, and then 2 rows, and I'm gonna wrap this, and I'm gonna name this income transactions. So right now we're starting with the layout and getting it ready so we can start adding all of our automations and functionalities. So again, in here, we're gonna have the totals, and I'm gonna do the total label on cell I12. Just because this income transactions table will only have my actual amount. This is where my total will be. I'm not gonna add that right now. And then in here, I'm gonna do my labels. So we're gonna start on cell G13 with the label full date. And then we're gonna do day, income source, and amount. Again, I'm gonna make this a bit wider. So I want this to start looking like a currency, so it looks nice from the beginning. And this is a shortcut that I really love and makes my life so much easier. So in order to select this entire area without having to scroll all the way down, I'm going to select this 3 cells on this one row, and then on my keyboard I'm going to press Shift Control down arrow a couple of times until it brings me all the way down. So that's a really quick way of selecting an entire area without having to click and drag all the way down. And then to format your currency, you have several options. You can just click on this Format as Currency button, and the symbol you see here depends on the country that you have selected in your spreadsheet. You can also go to Format, Number, and then select one of these options right here. You can click on Custom Currency and select one of these options. And you can also just come into this custom number format area and select one of these options. So I'm going to select this one. This is the one I like to use on my spreadsheets, but it's entirely up to you, the one you use. So now that this is done, I'm going to move on to creating this functionality in which you just add a day, and then the full date is created automatically. So I'm gonna break this down in a few steps before we reach the final formula. So the reason I created this the way I did is this is actually a full date. So as you can see right here, this is a full date. And that means that we can grab the month and the year very easily. So I'm gonna use these cells right here, but this is just, I'm gonna delete this afterwards. So if I do month, the month formula, open parentheses, and then select this cell, close parentheses, it's gonna give me the number 4, which is the month of April. And then if I do the same thing, but with the year, so I do year, I select this cell, and then I close parentheses, I get 2023. So as you can see, I'm able to know the month of my current tab, I can know the year, and if the user inputs a day, then I will also know the day. So how do we transfer all of these into this formula? So I'm gonna use the date formula. So if I do date, open parentheses, you can see this explanation of the formula. If you enter a year, a month, and a day, you will get a full date. So let's do it manually. Let's do 2023, the number 4 for the month of April, and then I'm gonna select this day cell right here, and I'm gonna close parentheses. So if I press enter, I have a full date. Now let's try to do the same thing, but this time, instead of manually entering this 2023 and this for the month of April, I'm gonna pull this from this section right here. So I'm gonna start with the year. I'm gonna select this 2023, I'm gonna delete it, and I'm gonna do year, open parentheses. I'm going to select this cell right here, and then I am going to press F4 on my keyboard, which will fix this cell in my formula. And all it does is it's adding these dollar signs right here, so you can add them manually, or you can set your cursor here and then press F4. And then I'm going to close parentheses, and I'm still getting my valid date. Now let's do the same thing for the month. So I'm going to delete the number 4, and I'm going to do month, open parentheses. I'm gonna select this cell, I'm gonna fix it using the F4 key on my keyboard, then I'm gonna close parentheses and enter. And as you can see, this is now completely dynamic. So if I change this to maybe, let's say, day 20, then this is changing properly. And if I were to change the month in here, then this is also changing. Now I have May right here. So that's how we make that completely dynamic. So now let's format it so it looks nicer. It looks like this. So I'm gonna use the same trick that I showed you before. I'm gonna select this cell, and then I'm gonna press on my keyboard Shift Control down arrow a couple of times. I'm gonna scroll up just so you can see the changes, and then I'm gonna click on Format, Number, and I'm gonna do custom date and time, and I'm gonna find one that I like. So I already know this is 2023, but I would like to know what day of the week that was. So I'm gonna select this one, and then I'm gonna click apply. So now if this changes, everything gets updated properly. Now, what happens when this is empty? When this is empty, my formula is still trying to do something, but I don't want it to do something. So I'm gonna come into my formula, and I'm gonna add a condition. So I'm gonna do if, open parentheses, and then my cell H14, which is the one holding the day, is not empty. Then I'm gonna add a comma, and then this will happen. So if my cell H14, which is the one holding my day, is not empty, I want this to happen. And if it's empty, I want nothing to happen. So I'm just gonna add a comma, and then I'm gonna close parentheses. So nothing's happening. And if I add a day, then something's happening. Now, I want to replicate this behavior in the entire column, and there are several options. One of them is clicking and dragging the formula, which it works, but then you would take too long just clicking and dragging all the way down. You could also copy it, select the entire column and paste, and that also replicates the formula. So this one is great. You could use this method, but I love showing you different features and as many formulas as I can. So I'm gonna delete everything I did. So you're gonna come into the formula that we have right here in this first cell, and we're gonna add the array formula at the beginning. Then we're gonna open parentheses, and we're gonna close parentheses in the end. So we just wrapped our entire formula that we had within the array formula. So now we're gonna come into this H14, and we are going to extend that range all the way to the end of the column. And we're gonna do the same thing here. So you do a colon right after H14, and then H. As you can see, something happened here, and this is extending the range from H14 all the way to the very end of the column. I'm gonna press enter, and now this formula was applied to the entire column from this one cell. So if I come down here, wherever I go, this is going to work all the way to the very end of my column. And this whole functionality is being created from this one cell. So that's one of my favorite formulas. But as I mentioned before, if you find it too complicated, you can just copy and paste. But what this does is it will extend this functionality, this formula, it will extend it and apply it to the range that you ask it to. So every single row, this will be checking if column H has a value, and if it does, then it's going to use this date formula to create a full date. And as you can see, the year is fixed to this cell, the month is fixed to this cell, but the day is dynamic, and it's going to be using the day that was entered on the corresponding row if there is one. And what's funny looking about this is this has no formula. So if you look at this, you could think there's nothing here, but if I enter a day, then my date gets created properly. Again, there's no formula here, there's no formula here, but if I enter a day, then it gets created properly over here. Now, if this is the first time that you see the array formula, I understand if it's complicated. I will continue using it throughout the tutorial. I just want to make a pause and let you know that the first time I saw it, I was super confused. So if you're confused, it's okay. I'm gonna continue using it. For now, if you still can't wrap your head around it, you can just pause the video, copy the formula, see that it works properly, that you copied it properly, and then I'm gonna continue using it. And if by the end of the tutorial you still want to know more about it, please let me know in the comments down below. So let's continue. Now that we have this, I'm gonna delete this days right here. Now that we have this, I'm going to create this drop-down functionality that we see right here. So this drop-down is created with the options that you entered in your income sources. So I'm gonna come into this income source area in my income transactions table. So this is column I, and I'm on cell 14. So I'm gonna select the entire column by clicking on this cell, then Shift, Control, and down arrow until I reach the very end. I'm just gonna come back up so you can see. And then I'm gonna click on data validation, and I'm gonna add a rule. I'm gonna add a drop down from a range. I'm gonna select this option from the criteria, and then I'm gonna do advanced options. And this is something that recently launched in Google Sheets, the option to see this as a chip, but I actually prefer the older way, which is just an arrow. So I'm gonna select that option in the advanced options. I'm gonna select this reject input, and then I will select this show help option. And to select my range, I'm going to click on this button right here, and then I'm just gonna select this one cell, the very first option of my income sources, so that's cell B14, and then I'm gonna do a colon, and I am going to input the letter B, which will select the entire range from cell B14 all the way down to the very end, whatever that cell is. That's why I only do B without any number afterward. Click OK. So once you do that, you're gonna click on done. I'm gonna close this, and if you come into these drop downs right here, you're gonna see the options that you entered here. So if I do another one, then that appears right here. And since I selected my range to use everything in this column starting on cell B14, if I do new one, then that's also going to show in my dropdown. So once we do that, what we're looking for is we want this actual column to be updated depending on what you selected from the dropdown and the amounts that you entered here. So in this case, if I enter 2 transactions for paycheck 1, each of $10, what I want here is I want to see $20 right here. So before I go into that, I will give it a bit of formatting just so it's easier to look at. So I'm going to take these labels, I'm going to select them, and I'm going to bold them. Same here. I'm also going to bold these titles, and then I'm going to make this font bigger. This is not looking like a currency. So what I'm gonna do is, since this one already looks the way I want to, I'm gonna select the entire column. This is another trick. So you're gonna select the entire column. You click on this cell, Shift, Control, down arrow a couple of times. I'm gonna come back up so just so you can see. And then I'm gonna click on this paint format button right next to the printer. And what this is going to do is it's going to sort of select the format of this entire area, and wherever I click, that same format is going to be applied. It's green right now, so it's sort of activated. So if I immediately click on this cell, that same formatting is going to be applied. So this is another one of my favorite features. Now I'm gonna move on to this actual column. So as you may recall, whenever you add an income source, new source, and you assign transactions to it, so let's do 20, it's gonna get added up automatically in this actual column right here. So what I'm gonna do is something similar to what I did here. I'm going to start by creating the formula for this one cell, and then I'm gonna use array formula to have that same functionality applied to the entire column without having to touch any of these cells. So I'm gonna do sum if And then as you can see, it's expecting a range, a criterion to compare it to, and then the range that I want added up. So I want this range, I14 colon I, to be compared to this one cell, and if it matches, I want these cells to be added up. So as you can see, in these two ranges, I ended them with colon I and then colon J, which is expanding the range all the way down to the very end of the spreadsheet without me having to enter an actual row. So if I were to enter, for example, here cell J19, my range only reaches this row 19. But if I delete the 19 and leave just the J at the end, it goes all the way down. So then I'm going to close parentheses, and I get 20, which is what I'm going for. And if I add another 10, then I get 30. I'm gonna add 100, and this is gonna keep on updating automatically, but then nothing is happening down here. So before I extend that all the way down, I need to add something else. I want to make sure that this formula will only be executed if there is an income source here. If this cell is blank, then I don't really want anything happening. So I'm gonna do if open parentheses, and then I'm gonna select this cell is not empty, comma, then this is happening, and then if it's empty, just a comma and close parentheses, meaning nothing is happening. So once I click that, it's all good, but if I delete that income source, then nothing is happening. So now I'm gonna extend this functionality all the way down. So first, I'm just going to assign some amounts to other options. So let's do side hustle. I'm gonna give that 300. So I assigned these amounts, but there's nothing being added up in these other cells. And the way I'm gonna expand this is I'm gonna do array formula at the beginning, open parentheses and close parentheses in the end. So I make sure I wrap this within the array formula. And then I'm gonna come into this B14 option, and I'm gonna do colon B, which means I will be expanding this all the way down. And then in this sum if, I also am going to expand column B. So I'm gonna do colon B, and then I'm gonna press enter. And now the same functionality is working on every single one of these options. If I did YouTube, I have nothing here, but if I add a YouTube transaction, let's do 20, then it shows here. And if I add another YouTube transaction, 25, it's getting added up, and this will work all the way down. So if I were to do a new source, and then I created a transaction right here, new source, I give it $100, then this is getting updated. This is the array formula doing its magic from this one cell. If you scroll down, you get these values, and it looks like you actually entered something, but if you delete it, I'm pressing my delete key in my keyboard, it sort of comes back because it's not manually entered. And as you can see, this cell, it has nothing in it. It has no formula, no value. I really love this formula, but it's really weird looking. So again, if you're confused, just pause the video and copy this exact same formula and maybe try to look at it for a minute and see if it's starting to make sense to you. And something very important to note is that when you do this, if you then go on and manually edit the cells that are being used in that array formula range, you're gonna get an error. So I tried to manually enter something here, but I have the array formula applying this functionality to the entire column. So if I enter something manually, I'm gonna get this ref error, and if I delete what I entered manually, then it works again. Now I would like to check if everything is being added up properly, so I'm going to add a sum formula right here. I'm gonna then click on cell D14, and I'm gonna do a colon and then D, and then I'm gonna close parentheses. So I'm basically just adding up the entire column, and then I'm just gonna copy this cell. I'm gonna come into cell J12 and I'm gonna paste it. So it's going to apply that same sum formula, but to this range in column J. I should be getting the same amounts. I'm gonna bold them, which I am getting. So everything is working properly. And then I'm gonna use the array formula once more. So if I were to do equals, my actual amount minus my expected amount, I'm gonna get this positive number because I earned more money than what I was expecting. And again, how do I use the array formula so it gets applied to the entire column? So I come into the cell and I do array formula before what I already had, open parentheses and close parentheses so I can wrap it. And if I leave it like that, nothing is happening. But if I come into this D14 section of the formula and I add a colon D afterwards, and then I come into this C14 section and I add a colon C, and then I press enter, it is now being applied to the entire thing. And it works the same way. If I manually do anything to it, I mess it up. So hopefully array formula is starting to make sense to you if it didn't from the beginning. And now I'm just gonna copy this cell and I'm gonna paste it here and I'm gonna paste it here. So it's just adding up its corresponding rows. So now that we've reached this point, I think it's a good idea that we start making it look prettier, since the expenses section is going to be way easier because it works pretty much the same way. So there's just a few tweaks that we're gonna have to make, and then afterwards we're just gonna make this summary table and create this graph, and then we will be done. So I'm gonna start just making this income section look pretty. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select this entire thing. Again, you select one cell, shift control, down arrow all the way down, and I'm gonna wrap that with a black border. So I'm gonna click on this borders button, and then I'm gonna select the black color, and then I'm gonna click on outer borders. So I'm gonna do the same thing here, shift control, down arrow, and I'm gonna give it some outer borders. And then I'm going to get rid of the grid lines. So as you can see in here, I don't actually have any grid lines. I just did this myself with a lighter color. So I'm gonna get rid of the grid lines by clicking on View, Show, and unchecking this grid lines option. So I'm gonna give this one a green background with some white font. And then I'm gonna do the same for this section. Green background with a white font. And then I want to make sure that I'm never editing things that I shouldn't be editing by accident. So this column, the actual column, as you may recall, we have this formula up here that handles the functionality for this entire column. And if I type in something, I'm gonna mess that up. So I'm going to add a gray background to everything that is supposed to be automated and that I shouldn't be editing. So that means these two columns, shift control down arrow, and then I'm going to give it this second gray background, and I'm also going to give it some white inner borders. So I'm gonna come into the border section, I'm gonna pick this white, and then I'm gonna click on inner borders. And then I'm gonna do the same thing for this section, which I also shouldn't be editing. I'm not gonna add borders to that. I'm going to bold this text, and then this column is also automated. So I'm gonna do the same thing, shift control, down arrow, gray background with white inner borders. And then the transactions table, I'm gonna have this be a darker gray. This is going to be a darker gray, this fourth gray right here. And then this is going to be the lighter gray. I'm also going to bold this. And then I would like this to be closer to the text. So I'm going to align it to the right. And then I'm gonna select both of these and I'm going to click on this italic option. I'm gonna make this a bit taller. And then I'm also going to add grid lines to this area that you are supposed to edit, and that's going to remain with a white background. So I'm gonna select those two, shift control down arrow, and then I'm gonna give it some very light inner borders. I'm gonna click on the second gray, inner borders, and then the same thing here. The second gray, inner borders. And then I'm gonna make the font for these two maybe a 13, and then these ones I will make those 12. And I'm gonna delete this, I'm not gonna use that anymore. And then I'm going to alter the width of my columns so it looks a bit better. And you can alter multiple columns at a time. So if I select these three and I alter the width in one of them, they all change. I can also select columns that are not right next to each other by clicking Command and clicking on the column. That's Command on Mac. I'm not sure what that would be on Windows. And then I'm going to make this smaller and they will all be the same width. So I'm really liking how this looks. And now I'm gonna move on to making the expenses section. So I'm going to select both these tables. I'm gonna select everything, including this column in between for this one row, and then Shift Control, down arrow a couple of times, and then I'm gonna copy this area. I'm gonna come back here and then I'm gonna go into the L10 cell and I'm gonna paste. I'm gonna make this a bit smaller. So right now this looks exactly the same, but this drop down is not being tied to this section. It's actually being tied to this section right here. So if I add a new income source here, you're not gonna see it here. But if I add a new income source here, then that shows up. That means that this one is actually being created using this, which we don't want. So first I'm gonna delete all of my income sources and expected amounts. I'm gonna make this wider. I'm gonna change the color just so we know that we are working on a different section. So I'm gonna change this to maybe a purple. And then I'm gonna call this expense summary. And this one I'm gonna call expense transactions. Now this I'm gonna call expense categories. This I'm gonna call budget. And then again, expense category right here. I'm gonna make this wider. And everything else I'm gonna leave the same. So this formula right now, I'm not gonna touch this because it actually works properly. If I change the number right here, everything is updated properly. So this one works fine, and as you can see in the formula, if I press enter, you're gonna see that it's actually using this column instead of this one. So that's exactly what we need, and it's still using this cell to pull the year and the month, and that's happening because we fixed it. So no matter where I put the formula, this will change depending on where you copied and paste the formula. But this cell, since I fixed it, it's going to always be tied to this date cell right here. But this section of the formula, since I fixed it using those dollar signs, it's always going to be tied to this cell right here. So that works fine, no need to change that, but this one we need to change. So I'm gonna select the entire column. Again, I'm gonna click on this one cell, Shift Control, down arrow a couple of times. I'm gonna come back up and I'm going to do data validation, and I'm gonna click on add rule. And then I'm gonna select the drop down from range criteria, and I'm going to click on this select a range option, and I'm gonna come into this expense category section. I'm gonna select the first cell, which is in column L, row 14, and then I'm gonna do colon and then L. So that will select the entire range from L14 all the way down, and I'm gonna click OK, and then I'm gonna click on done. And I'm gonna get asked this question, and this is happening because since I copied and pasted those drop downs from the income section, it's sort of treating them the same way, but I actually don't want them to be connected in any way. So I'm gonna select the just this instance option, and this is really important. If you don't click on the just this instance option, you are going to mess the income drop downs, and we don't want that. So you're gonna click on just this instance, and now it's gonna give you these errors. So I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna delete these options. And I actually forgot to make it look like this instead of making it look like a chip. And the reason I don't love the chip, let's fill it up a bit. So let's do rent. And then let's say you select rent, and that looks fine. And if I delete, then it works fine. But if I delete again by accident, I actually got rid of the chip. So I don't love it. You can easily bring it back. You just copy it and paste it from another one that is still working properly. But I'm just still more into this look, but you can absolutely leave it as a chip. But to have it look like this, I'm going to click on one of the drop downs, and I'm gonna click on this edit button, and I'm gonna go into the advanced options, and I'm gonna select arrow, and then I'm gonna click on done. And again, I'm getting asked if I want to apply this just to this instance or apply it to all. In this case, in the previous step, I already untied these drop downs from the income part. So now this is completely independent from that other part. So I can use this apply to all option, which will apply it to my entire column without applying it to the income part, because those two are no longer connected. They no longer have to do anything with each other, because in the previous step I clicked this. So now I can do apply to all, and it gets applied here. And wherever I click, I see rent. And if I come back to the income one, it still works properly. I didn't do anything that messed that up. In this point, just come back into the income transaction section and make sure this still has your income sources. Just click on a couple of drop downs and make sure you're still seeing your income sources. and then you click here and make sure you are seeing your expense categories. If it looks like this, then everything's fine and you can move on. So I'm gonna add a couple more. Let's do groceries. So I'm gonna delete this amounts, and right now I don't have a budget for these, so I'm gonna do 10, 20, 30, and then if I come here and I add rent and then I add an amount, then the actual amount gets updated. And the reason this is working right out of the box without having to change anything and just by copying and pasting the income section is, if you look at this formula, as you may recall, this one cell is the one that's controlling the entire functionality. So if you come here and you look at this formula, you're gonna see that there are no dollar signs. That means that I'm not fixing the formula to any specific column or any specific row. So whenever I copy it and paste it, those columns are going to automatically shift around. So as you can see, if I were to delete this and then I were to come into this income section and I click on this formula, you can see that I have column B, column I, column B, column J. But if I copy that and I paste it here, all of those columns were shifted around. So if I were to fix this, then it wouldn't work. If I were to fix these values using the F4 technique that I showed you before, so you just place your cursor on these cells and press F4 on your keyboard, then this one works perfectly. But then if I copy it and paste it, then it's using all of these columns right here. So if I press enter, I can sort of highlight the columns that this is using. And since I used the dollar signs to fix them, it's actually using the ones in the income section. So if I undo this, my dollar signs are no longer here. So if I copy and paste, it's gonna work perfectly. And as you can see, I just highlighted the cells that I'm using, which are these columns, which is exactly what I was looking for. So in case you were wondering why this is working out of the box, that's why. The same goes for this one. It's shifted, so it would use these columns instead. And then this one, it shifted, so this would use this column instead, but it was fixed to this month and year cell. So I hope I explained this in a way that makes sense to you. If it doesn't, please let me know in the comments below, and maybe I can do an example that is just focused on this. Now I'm gonna fill this up a bit more before we move on to the summary section. And now something I like to do is I like to get rid of extra columns that I really don't need. So I'm gonna delete those to leave just this one final column in the end. And now I'm gonna create this summary table right here. So I'm going to select a group of cells. So I'm gonna select everything from cell B5 to cell E8. And I'm gonna add a black outer border to that one. And then I'm gonna maybe make it a bit taller. And then I'm gonna add my label. So I'm gonna do summary. Then I'm gonna do expected, actual, difference. And then in here, I'm gonna add income label. This one's gonna be expenses. And then this will be amount left. So then I'm just gonna very quickly give it some formatting so it looks pretty from the beginning. So I'm gonna give this a blue background with some white text, and then I'm gonna make it a bit bigger, font size 11. I'm gonna bold this, and then this one, since this will be automated, I'm gonna give it a light gray background so I remember not to touch it, with some white inner borders. And then this one, I'm gonna give that maybe a darker gray background. I'm gonna add one white border at the top, and then also some inner white borders. And I'm gonna select these 3 rows, and I'm gonna make those a bit taller. So as you can see, they all changed at the same time because I selected them all at once. And now what I'm looking for is I want my expected amount from my income section to show here. So I'm just gonna do equals and then this total right here. And then my actual amount from my income section, I'm gonna pull that from here, cell D12. And then the difference, I can either just select this one, or I can do equals the actual amount minus the expected amount, and that should give me this exact same number. So I'm gonna do the same for the expenses section, equals, and I'm gonna select this expected amount, the budget, cell M12, and then the actual amount, I'm gonna do equals, and I'm gonna select cell N12, and then I'm gonna do equals actual minus expected, and I get this minus 10. And then finally, for my amount left, I want to know how much of my income I will have left after expenses. So I'm going to do equals minus expenses. What you can do is either just do the exact same thing, income minus expenses, or you can copy this formula and then select these two cells right here, right click, paste special, formula only. This way you will make sure that the formula will be pasted there. It will adapt to their corresponding cells because I didn't fix anything, but the formatting will be respected, so I will still keep my border. I'm going to highlight the actual one because I want it to stand out. And now, as you can see from my example, I like this to change color depending on the situation. So for the income part, if I get a positive number, that means I made more money than I expected, and I had that turn green using conditional formatting. And in the expenses section, if I have a negative number, I spent less money than I expected, which is the case here, and so I want that to turn green. And if I spent more money than I expected, then I want that to turn red, and if I made less money than I expected, I want that to turn red. So I'm gonna do that with conditional formatting. I'm gonna start here, and then I'm just gonna very quickly do the same thing to these other sections. So I'm gonna come into this difference for the income part. I'm gonna click on format, conditional formatting, and I'm going to select the less than option first. So if it's less than 0, then I don't want anything to happen to the background, but I want my font to turn red. And then I also want it to become italic. So in this case, I earned less money than I expected. So that's a negative number and it turns red. So I'm gonna click on done. And then I'm gonna add another rule since I still have this selected. So I'm gonna add another rule and I'm gonna do greater than 0, no background. And then I'm gonna pick a very dark green, also italic, and then I'm gonna click on done. So if I come here and I pretend I made a lot more money than I expected, then it's gonna turn green. In this case, I made $254 over what I expected and it turns green. And if I made less money, it turns red. So I want that to happen here as well. So you could click here, shift control, down arrow a couple times, select the whole thing and do that all over again. Or I'm gonna show you another trick. So you can select this one cell and then you can click on format, conditional formatting, and you're seeing these two rules. So I can actually add another range into these two rules manually, so I can apply that in here as well. So my range is cell E14 and all the way down to the end of my spreadsheet. So if I select one of these rules and I do a comma, and then I do E14 colon E, and I press done, then that also got applied to this range. And now this rule is being applied to cell E6, but it's also being applied to this entire range starting on cell E14 and going all the way down. So let's do the same thing for this one. I'm gonna do a comma, E14 colon E, done, and now that got applied in here as well. Now I actually want the same thing to happen here, so the amount left, if I get a negative number, that means I have less money left than I expected. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing. I'm gonna add this cell to that range, which is cell E8. So I'm just gonna do comma E8, done, and that got applied. I'm gonna do the same thing for the green one, E8, done. So now all of these have that same rule applied to them, and I actually forgot about this one, so I'm going to go back and do that as well. Comma E12, done, comma E12, which is holding this difference, done. And now my rule was applied to this entire thing, and if I were to change this, maybe I also want to bold it, then everything will change at the same time. If I wanted to underline it, then they are all changing at the same time. So that's why I like to have them all wrapped together in the same rule instead of creating the rules individually. So now I'm gonna close this and I'm gonna do the same thing for the expenses section, but this time the logic is reversed. If I get a negative number, that's a good thing because I spent less money. And if I get a positive number, that's a bad thing because I spent more money. So that turns red. And another thing you can do is you can select multiple cells at a time and apply the formula to all of those at the same time. So I use the command key on my Mac to be able to do that. I'm not exactly sure how you can do this on Windows. But what I do is I'm going to come into this different section and I'm going to select this column first. So once you have that, you can just go on selecting other individual cells while still keeping this range selected. So I'm going to click on this cell O14, Shift Control down arrow, and then I'm going to leave that selected, and I'm going to press Command on my keyboard. If you're on Mac, I'm going to try to figure out what that is on Windows, and if I do, I will leave it in the comments down below. So I'm going to press Command, and then I'm going to click on this cell. And that selected that one cell without touching anything else. And then I'm going to press Command on my keyboard again, and I'm going to click here. Now I have this range selected and this cell selected as well. So now I'm going to click on Format, Conditional Formatting, and whatever I do will get applied to all of those cells that I have selected. So I'm going to do greater than 0, no background, and greater means bad, so that's going to be red. I'm going to do italic, and done. And now I'm going to click again, add another rule, and then I'm going to do less than 0, no background. I'm going to have this become a green, italic, and as you can see, that was applied to this entire thing, to this total, and then to this total as well. I'm going to click on done. Now I'm going to close this. Everything works properly, everything is connected. And now I'm just missing this chart right here. So this one I'm going to create by selecting everything from cell B5 to cell D7 without selecting the difference and without selecting the amount left. And then I'm going to click on Insert Chart, and that inserted my chart automatically, and then I can use this section to the right to edit the way my chart looks. So I don't really need this title, so I'm just gonna click there and I'm gonna press delete so I can have more room here, and then I'm gonna make this font smaller again so I have more room. So you select it, and if it doesn't pop up automatically, just go to Customize, Chart and Axis Titles, and then I'm gonna make this font smaller. Let's do maybe 14. So yeah, that's better. And then I want to change these colors. So I'm gonna make these expected ones. I want to turn it yellow. So you come into this fill color section and you select maybe a yellow. And then I want the actual one to be maybe orange. So you can either select it from this drop down, or you can just select it directly on the chart and then click on fill color and then make that orange. And we're done. What you can do is you can just each month you can duplicate this tab and then double click and select a different month, and make sure if you delete something, make sure you only delete cells that have a white background. So this way you can start over. You can also just keep a blank tab so you can create copies from that one, and you can rename this. So that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. This did end up being a very long video, so I hope you don't mind, and I hope that if you followed along you learned something. Please let me know in the comments down below if this was too hard, if this was too easy, if you're still confused about some of the formulas. And remember, you can find the link to this file in the description down below. So if you are confused, if something is not working properly, you can go into that file and see the formula directly and copy it and paste it into your own spreadsheet. And if you followed along exactly in the same cells that I did, that should work fine. And of course, this is not the only way you can do this. This is just the way I did it for the tutorial. So if you found a better formula or found a better way to do something, please go ahead and use that in your own template. And if you stuck till the end, please let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.